The company made an announcement this morning of $141 million into the facility.
This announcement marks the largest single investment that our owners have made in our business to date. It's going to allow us to produce even more of the products locally, supplying the city of Brampton, supplying all of Ontario, and supplying Eastern Canada for decades to come.
Canada just secured the largest bottling sector investment in Coca-Cola Canada's history, a $141 million expansion in Brampton that signals a major shift in how global companies are navigating North America's increasingly unpredictable politics. What makes this moment so significant is the timing. Coca-Cola is choosing to deepen its presence in Canada precisely as the United States, under President Donald Trump, is creating unprecedented uncertainty for cross-border industries through escalating tariffs and erratic trade policy. At a time when automakers like Stellantis and GM are pulling production out of Canada because of pressure from Washington, Coca-Cola is doing the opposite. It is expanding here, building here, and sourcing from here. This isn't just a local economic announcement. It's a clear message about which country multinational companies believe will offer real stability in the decade ahead. And in this case, that answer is Canada.
The investment will go towards expanding manufacturing, distribution, and sales. It will also introduce a new state-of-the-art production line capable of producing at least 20 million additional beverage cases and create up to 500 jobs during construction. The government says the expansion will be built exclusively by Canadian tradespeople and will have 75% of materials sourced domestically.
The announcement in Brampton laid out a major manufacturing upgrade, a state-of-the-art production line capable of producing 20 million additional cases every year, supported by a construction phase that will employ roughly 500 Canadian tradespeople. The company emphasized that 75% of all materials used in the project will come from Canadian suppliers, a deliberate choice that keeps capital circulating inside the domestic economy. Political and union leaders who attended the event highlighted a recurring theme. Canada is still capable of delivering growth and stability, even as the U.S. trade war continues to erode industrial jobs across the border. The emphasis on domestic sourcing, domestic labor, and long-term local production is not accidental. It reflects a strategic shift towards strengthening Canada's internal capacity, rather than depending on external supply chains that have become increasingly unstable. At the same time, Coca-Cola's expansion in Calgary adds another layer to the story. A fully automated 12-story warehouse, the company's first of its kind in Canada, is now operating with a highly trained workforce of more than 500 employees. The facility centralizes storage, reduces reliance on third-party logistics networks, and reinforces a continental footprint that is anchored firmly on Canadian soil. Together, these developments reveal a coordinated corporate strategy: build in Canada, expand in Canada, and plan for long-term operations in Canada.
What stands out most in this moment is that Canada is becoming a stability anchor in a North America defined by volatility. As of February 2026, Trump's second-term tariff regime, including the expanded baseline tariff on global imports, has created constant noise for manufacturers and distributors operating inside the United States. Canada, under the leadership of Prime Minister Mark Carney, is positioning itself as the predictable alternative. Coca-Cola's choice is a case study in this shift. The company could have expanded in the U.S. Midwest, where it already has deep infrastructure, but instead it put new capital into Canada, where policy is clearer, labor markets are steadier, and cross-border risk is significantly lower. This decision becomes even more striking when contrasted with recent moves from Stellantis and GM. While U.S. political incentives successfully pulled some automotive production southward, Coca-Cola is signaling that not all companies view the U.S. as an attractive destination, especially when supply chains can be disrupted overnight by a policy announcement or a tariff increase.
The domestic sourcing requirement in the Brampton expansion shows how Canada is strengthening its economic sovereignty. By using Canadian steel, Canadian drywall, Canadian packaging inputs, and Canadian construction. The project reinforces a national industrial ecosystem that has been gaining momentum. Analysts have already linked Coca-Cola's investment to broader growth trends in Canadian construction materials and automation sectors, both of which expanded in response to global reshoring and supply chain diversification. Labor leaders have been equally direct. At the announcement, they highlighted that many Canadian workers have faced real job losses because of the U.S. trade war. This is not political theater. It reflects measurable economic damage. Over the past 2 years, Canada has absorbed more than $1 billion in lost exports and several thousand displaced industrial workers as U.S. tariffs reshaped production incentives. Against that backdrop, Coca-Cola's investment becomes more than a business decision. It is a lifeline for skilled trades, transport workers, and manufacturing staff who need stable, long-term employment. The upskilling of workers in the Calgary warehouse further demonstrates a strategic commitment to building durable human capital in Canada, rather than outsourcing automation expertise abroad.
There is also a critical logistical dimension. Coca-Cola's success depends on predictable, high-throughput distribution. Border delays caused by tariff disputes or political friction, including Trump's recent threats surrounding the Gordie Howe Bridge, present real risks to time-sensitive consumer goods. By expanding production and logistics capacity inside Canada, the company effectively insulates itself from U.S. policy volatility. In other words, Canada is not just a place to manufacture, it is a shield against Washington's unpredictability. When placed inside the broader geopolitical context, the significance grows even clearer. Canada is actively diversifying trade relationships, strengthening domestic industries, and preparing for the 2026 USMCA review with a much stronger hand than many expected. Meanwhile, allies around the world are increasingly hedging against the United States, adjusting their supply chains and investment decisions in anticipation of further disruptions. Coca-Cola may not say this publicly, but its actions align perfectly with that global trend. Build where the rules are consistent, expand where the political climate is stable, and protect operations from governments that treat tariffs as weapons.
This $141 million announcement may sound like a routine corporate expansion, but it represents a deeper shift in how multinational companies are reading the continent's future. One of the world's most recognizable brands has effectively cast its vote for Canada, not just because of market demand, but because Canada now offers something the United States cannot reliably guarantee: stability. As production grows in Brampton and automation ramps up in Calgary, Canada gains more than jobs and infrastructure. It gains strategic leverage, industrial confidence, and a narrative that directly pushes back against the idea that Canada is losing ground in North America. In fact, the opposite is happening. When companies with global reach decide that Canada is the safer bet, that choice reshapes the balance of economic power. And with the USMCA review approaching, the real question is simple. If Coca-Cola is already moving this way, how many more companies are preparing to quietly follow?
If there is the preeminence of the United States, does that necessarily relegate Canada to a secondary role?
Well, unless Canada wants to, Canada is not going to be I think it would be difficult for Canada to become the preeminent military power and economic power in the world. Okay? I think what this says is we want America and our close allies, and we have no closer economic ally or a military ally than Canada.
After hearing the U.S. ambassador openly suggest that Canada will never be the preeminent economic or military power, the real question isn't whether Canada is being pushed into a secondary role, it's why Washington feels the need to say it out loud. When an American ambassador emphasizes U.S. dominance right before a critical trade renegotiation, he isn't offering reassurance, he's signaling hierarchy. And that hierarchy is exactly what this moment exposes. Donald Trump's tariff blitz, his emotional reaction to a single Ontario advertisement, and his insistence on U.S. preeminence all point to one thing. Washington is no longer negotiating with Canada as a partner, but attempting to manage Canada as a subordinate. But Canada today is not the Canada of past trade battles, and this time the imbalance is not as one-sided as the United States believes.
The drama began when ongoing trade talks between Prime Minister Mark Carney's government and the Trump administration were suddenly thrown off course. U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra revealed something extraordinary. The negotiations were close, very close, to a breakthrough on steel, aluminum, energy, even autos. Then one thing happened. A provincial advertisement from Ontario aired during the World Series referenced tariffs and used Ronald Reagan's own words. That was enough to set off the president. Within hours, the mood inside Washington flipped. The deal collapsed. Phone calls were made across continents, and Trump's team abruptly shifted from cooperation to confrontation. Canada held firm. Ottawa refused to apologize, refused to retreat, and simply stated that talks would resume when appropriate. Even in this tense environment, Canada delivered a trade surplus with the United States, driven by resilient exports in metals and transportation equipment. At the same time, Trump escalated by threatening new tariffs on Canadian fertilizer, a lifeline input for U.S. farmers already facing rising costs and falling margins. And he confirmed that the era of tariff-free trade in North America is over. This is the political weather system Canada is operating in: unpredictable, emotional, and increasingly unilateral. Washington's reaction to a single provincial ad tells us something fundamental about the current U.S. administration. Its negotiating posture is fragile. A mature government doesn't walk away from a near-finalized trade deal because of a 30-second message aired by a regional government, but this White House did. Trump's response wasn't strategic, it was personal. The ambassador practically admitted that everything fell apart because the president felt targeted. That level of emotional volatility is a problem, but not for Canada. It is a problem for the United States because it signals to every trading partner on Earth that deals can collapse at any moment for reasons unrelated to economics or diplomacy. Ottawa, by contrast, remained calm. The Carney government did not escalate the rhetoric, did not match the outrage, and did not turn diplomacy into theater. That contrast, discipline versus impulsiveness, quietly strengthened Canada's position. The second major takeaway is even clearer. The United States intends to place tariffs on Canada, regardless of the negotiating framework. Ambassador Hoekstra didn't hide it. He said that tariffs will form part of any future arrangement and that free trade doesn't exist. That admission matters. It means Canada is no longer facing a technical trade disagreement, it is facing a structural shift in American doctrine. Washington now believes tariffs are the default setting, not the exception. And when Trump says the U.S. must remain preeminent, the message between the lines is unmistakable. Canada is expected to play the supporting role while America plays the lead. That's not partnership, that's hierarchy. And hierarchies have consequences. For Canada, it confirms that the next phase of the U.S.-Canada relationship will require not deference, but strategy. What Washington fails to recognize is that modern economic power is no longer measured by who declares preeminence, but by who controls future critical inputs and industrial stability. Canada's command over clean electricity, critical minerals, freshwater capacity, and cross-border auto components gives it a quietly compounding advantage that isn't captured by political slogans. Preeminence in the 21st century belongs to the country that can guarantee reliable production, not the one that shouts the loudest. Trump's insistence on hierarchy only highlights how outdated his economic lens has become, and how much leverage Canada actually holds in the next industrial cycle.
The auto industry is the next battleground. Trump wants to cap Canadian vehicle exports and introduce quotas, arguing that the United States must make cars and make money making cars. But the North American auto ecosystem is deeply integrated, and tariffs don't just hurt Canada. They raise prices for American consumers, disrupt U.S. assembly lines, and undermine competitive advantage against Europe and Asia. Ottawa understands this, and that is why Canada's countermessage has been consistent. Cooperation benefits both economies. Coercion does not.
Canada's real counterweight to Trump isn't diversification. It's the structure of the North American auto industry itself. Hoekstra openly admitted that the United States imports far more Canadian-built vehicles than it exports, and that Washington's new tariff-first mindset cannot simply rewrite those realities. Modern auto manufacturing relies on an intricate cross-border ballet of components: steel frames stamped in Ontario, aluminum chassis poured in Quebec, engine modules assembled in Windsor, and electronics shipped back and forth across the Ambassador Bridge every single day. Any attempt by Trump to impose caps or quotas would not merely inconvenience Canada, it would choke U.S. assembly lines within weeks. Canada's leverage isn't political theater, it's baked into the architecture of the auto supply chain, and Trump's threats only highlight how dependent Detroit truly is on Canadian stability.
There is also a structural advantage Canada holds that almost no one in Washington seems prepared to acknowledge: freshwater. Hoekstra briefly mentioned that over 200 municipalities across the two countries rely on shared water systems, calling freshwater the oil of the next 20 years. What he didn't say is how central water is to the next phase of auto manufacturing. Electric vehicle plants, microchip fabs, and battery facilities consume staggering amounts of water. As the EV transition accelerates, water becomes industrial currency, and Canada has more of it than any advanced economy on the continent. No tariff can change geography. If auto production is shifting toward high water demand processes, Canada's natural resource advantage transforms into a long-term competitive edge that neither tariffs nor quotas can neutralize.
So here's where we stand: a president whose negotiating style can be thrown off by a single advertisement, a White House that openly states tariffs on Canada are unavoidable, a doctrine of American preeminence that leaves no space for equal partnership, and an auto and fertilizer strategy that risks harming U.S. workers more than Canadian ones. Canada isn't simply enduring this moment, it's redefining itself through it. The question now is simple: will Canada use this disruption to fully reshape its economic future away from dependence on Washington? Or will the United States eventually realize that a stable, respected, and prosperous Canada is not a threat, but its most valuable ally? The next chapter of North American trade will not be written by emotion. It will be written by strategy. And right now, Canada is playing the smarter game.
60% of Americans are opposed to Trump's tariffs. And of course, there was all this news coming out of the World Series, right? Canada tariffs. We're not just talking China, we're talking Canada and tariffs.
In Donald Trump's second term, Canada has become the center of a political storm and the symbol of a deeper loss of confidence among Americans. New polling from CNN shows that 60% of Americans now oppose Trump's trade agenda, marking the steepest drop in support for any major policy of his presidency. What makes this shift even more striking is that it began not with China or Mexico, but with Canada, the country most Americans have long admired and trusted. In the fall of 2025, Trump imposed a new 10% tariff on Canadian imports after an Ontario television ad mocked his economic message. What might have looked like a show of strength instead revealed how fragile his standing had become. Americans didn't rally behind him, they recoiled. They questioned why their president was punishing a neighbor so closely tied to American life. The numbers tell the story. Trump's tariff politics are losing the people, and the fallout is spreading far beyond Washington.
So the bottom line is this. If I were advising President Donald John Trump when it comes to his policies, I'd say step off the tariffs, at least from a political point of view, because the bottom line is it doesn't sell with the American people.
The public turns against Trump. Back in late 2020, most Americans still gave tariffs the benefit of the doubt. Polls then showed 52% in favor, 48% against. 5 years later, that balance has collapsed. By October 2025, 6 in 10 Americans told CNN and Gallup they oppose Trump's trade taxes. Only about a third support his new measures on Canada. The frustration cuts across party lines. Working families say everyday costs have climbed, while business owners complain that uncertainty is choking investment. Economists once called tariffs a temporary tool. Voters now see them as a permanent headache. Trump's promise to make America win again feels distant when grocery bills rise and manufacturing jobs still haven't returned. Even inside his own coalition, cracks are visible. Manufacturers in Michigan, farmers in Iowa, and retailers in Pennsylvania, the very states that helped elect him, now speak of lost contracts and shrinking margins. What once symbolized economic strength has turned into a symbol of strain. The same policy that defined Trump's rise is now defining his decline. The breaking point came when Trump decided to target Canada. Picking a fight with China feels strategic to many Americans. Picking a fight with Canada feels personal and wrong. Polls released by CNN's data unit show that Canada's popularity among Americans stands at plus 49 points, while Trump's own approval rating sits 10 points underwater. Canada is not just another trade partner. It is the friendly neighbor, the reliable ally, the country that Americans consistently describe as the nicest people in the world. Every time Trump attacks Ottawa, he offends that image. What makes it worse is timing. With the economy flat and inflation stubborn, voters see no reason for another confrontation. They look north and see stability, cooperation, and shared values, everything missing from Washington's rhetoric. For them, tariffs on Canada are not about economics anymore. They are about judgment. A president who can't tell a rival from a friend looks less like a strategist and more like a man picking fights to stay relevant. The result is political isolation. Americans admire Canada more than they trust their own leader on trade. That single comparison, popularity plus 49 for Canada versus minus 10 for Trump, captures why this policy feels like a mistake no speech can fix. If the backlash in the United States was sharp, the reaction in Canada was historic. Only 2 years ago, in 2023, just 7% of Canadians considered the United States a threat. By mid-2025, that number had surged to 48%, according to Pew Research Center. Almost half the country now describes America as a potential danger, not a partner. This is more than anger. It is a psychological shift. Canada's sense of security, long tied to friendship with Washington, is breaking away. Canadian media openly describe the U.S. as unstable and unpredictable. Political leaders, from Prime Minister Mark Carney to provincial premiers, talk about building new trade bridges across Asia and Europe instead of waiting for another tariff fight. The cultural distance is growing too. Surveys by Environics Institute show record levels of national pride tied to independence and self-reliance. For the first time in decades, Canadians no longer measure their prosperity by how closely they align with American policies. Americans still adore Canada, but Canadians have stopped believing that admiration is mutual. The emotional alliance that once defined North America is eroding, replaced by caution and quiet resentment. Inside the United States, the political price is becoming clear. Congressional Democrats now describe Trump's trade taxes as self-inflicted wounds. Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania, a senior member of the Budget Committee, points out that 40% of total U.S. trade involves just 3 partners: Canada, Mexico, and China. When tariffs hit one of them, the shock ripples through the entire economy. He argues that tariffs make life harder and more expensive for everyone, and polls back him up. Independent voters increasingly link tariffs to inflation. Small business groups call them hidden taxes. Even Republican lawmakers privately admit that Trump's one big beautiful bill of tax and spending cuts has not delivered tangible relief. Instead, it created larger deficits and a sense that policy now serves the wealthy first. Meanwhile, the government is edging toward another shutdown as internal divisions deepen. Moderate Republicans warn that voters in border states like Michigan and New York are furious over lost exports. In simple terms, Trump's promise of economic nationalism has become a domestic liability. What was meant to show strength abroad is now exposing weakness at home.
While Washington argues Ottawa is moving on, Canada's government has redirected its trade focus toward Asia, sealing investment frameworks with the ASEAN bloc and renewing talks with the European Union. The strategy is clear: diversify before dependency turns into vulnerability. Prime Minister Mark Carney's message during his October trip to Malaysia summed up that new mindset. He spoke about sustainable growth, rule-based cooperation, and reliable partnerships, principles that resonate strongly across Asia. Canada's pivot is not defiance for its own sake, it is survival through adaptation. In less than a year, Canada has positioned itself as a bridge between Western economies and emerging Asian markets. Energy, technology, and critical minerals are the foundation of that plan. While Trump's White House counts tariff percentages, Ottawa counts investment pledges. The contrast could not be sharper. One nation is building barriers, the other is building trust. For Canadians, this new direction feels liberating. For Americans, it is a reminder that leadership by punishment has limits. The neighbor once treated as a junior partner is now acting like an equal, or in some arenas, a step ahead.
Trump's second-term tariff gamble was meant to prove that economic power could restore political dominance. Instead, it has shown how fragile both can be. Public confidence has collapsed. Allies feel betrayed, and the friendship that once defined the northern border now feels uncertain. The numbers are undeniable. 60% of Americans reject Trump's tariffs, and nearly half of Canadians view the United States as a threat. These are not abstract opinions. They are evidence that the moral and emotional core of the U.S.-Canada relationship is breaking. Tariffs were supposed to make America stronger. They made it more divided. They were supposed to make allies respect Washington's strength. They made them question its judgment. In politics, power depends on persuasion as much as force. And when a leader turns the country's best friend into an adversary, the message heard around the world is simple. America's greatest opponent might be its own stubbornness.
And while Carney says he will meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping this week, U.S. President Donald Trump says he won't meet with Carney for a long time and is now hitting Canada with more tariffs.
Donald Trump says he doesn't want to see you at all at APEC. Has the Canadian government given any consideration to the possibility that he doesn't want to negotiate, and do you have a contingency plan for that?
We have lots of, yes. The short answer is yes.
When Trump slammed the door, Carney found another one wide open, and this time it leads straight to Beijing. At the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Busan, South Korea, the world expected another chapter in the U.S.-Canada tariff standoff. Instead, it got a plot twist. Donald Trump said he wouldn't meet Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister he once praised as a smart negotiator. But while Trump was busy taking it personally, Carney was busy taking it globally. This year's APEC meeting was supposed to be Trump's moment to reaffirm U.S. dominance in the Pacific. Instead, the spotlight shifted. On one side stood Trump, declaring he didn't want to see Carney for a while. On the other, Carney confirmed he would meet Xi Jinping. The irony is impossible to ignore. A U.S. president who built his brand on making deals is now boycotting one, while Canada, the neighbor he's punishing, steps into a room with the world's second largest economy. The refusal wasn't just diplomatic drama.
It was a signal to the world that America's trade posture had become unpredictable. And in trade, unpredictability is weakness. Carney's response was quiet but strategic. He didn't scold, threaten, or tweet. He moved forward. While Trump's words shut down negotiations, Carney's schedule opened new ones with Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines. In Kuala Lumpur, he announced plans to increase Canada's non-U.S. exports by 50% within a decade, about $300 billion in new trade. That's not a headline about revenge. It's a blueprint for independence. The plan builds on agreements already advancing with ASEAN and Japan, while preparing new ones with China. Trump wanted to isolate Canada. What he actually did was isolate himself. Every time Washington lashes out, Ottawa gains another incentive to diversify. Trump's decision to pile another 10% tariff on Canadian goods came days before APEC. He called it punishment for an Ontario government TV ad mocking his tariffs. It sounded impulsive, and it was. Even U.S. officials couldn't say when the new tariff would take effect or which sectors it would hit. That uncertainty created a vacuum, and Xi Jinping knows how to fill vacuums. While Trump's team was still deciding where to aim his new tariffs, Chinese officials were already preparing their talking points for Carney's meeting. For Xi, Trump's volatility is free advertising. The message to middle powers like Canada is clear. China can be a stable partner when Washington can't. In global trade, reliability is currency, and Beijing been saving every coin. Each outburst from Washington erodes America's leverage. For decades, the U.S. used consistency as its greatest strength. Allies trusted the rules, rivals respected them. That foundation is cracking. When a U.S. president cancels trade talks over a provincial TV ad, every partner starts asking the same question. If it's this hard for Canada, what chance does anyone else have? At the same moment Trump was escalating tariffs, the IMF warned that prolonged protectionism could cut global growth by 0.5 percentage point this year. The message wasn't directed only at Beijing, it was a caution to Washington itself. Volatility carries a price tag. Canada sees that clearly. Its pitch to Asia now rests on one line: we don't weaponize trade. For investors and governments tired of U.S. unpredictability, that's becoming a powerful slogan. The difference between Trump and Carney isn't just policy, it's temperament. Trump governs through shock, tweets, and outrage. Carney governs through process, patience, and partnerships. In Busan, one man canceled a meeting over a political insult. The other lined up 4 new bilateral sessions in 3 days. Trump called for more tariffs. Carney called for more exports. Trump framed allies as enemies. Carney treated rivals as opportunities. That contrast is changing perceptions. To American voters, Trump's defiance looks like strength, but to international markets, it looks like instability. The dollar may still dominate global trade, but the trust that sustains it is eroding. Each time the White House lashes out, that erosion deepens. Carney, by comparison, has turned calmness into strategy. His build-at-home policy, investing hundreds of billions of dollars in domestic industries while expanding overseas partnerships, signals a balanced approach that many in Asia find appealing. It's pragmatic, not performative. While Trump argues over ads, Xi arrives with talking points about supply chains and energy security. China isn't offering friendship, it's offering deals. And that's exactly what countries like Canada, Malaysia, and Japan are looking for. In the past 6 months, China has signed new energy and minerals agreements with South Korea, Pakistan, and several ASEAN members. Now, Canada could join that list. Trump's tariffs, meant to pressure Ottawa, are instead pushing it closer to Beijing, a strategic irony with long-term consequences. For Xi, it's simple math.
every U.S. misstep in the Pacific widens China's path to influence. At Busan, he doesn't need to confront Trump directly. He just needs to watch the U.S. push its allies away.
The image from Busan tells the story. Trump, the man who once branded himself as the deal-maker, refuses to meet an ally. Carney, the central banker turned statesman, sits down with Xi to discuss trade and stability. The American president, frustrated by an ad, becomes a symbol of volatility. The Canadian Prime Minister, calm under pressure, becomes a symbol of adaptation. Trump's policies were meant to bring manufacturing home and force allies to fall in line. Instead, they're accelerating a realignment where America is no longer the center of gravity. The tariff wars, the canceled talks, the personal grudges, all of it has opened a gap others are eager to fill. When Trump slammed the door, Carney didn't argue. He found another door and walked right through it. Now that path leads to Beijing, to ASEAN, and to a future where Canada's trade map looks very different from the one drawn in Washington. And if that happens, it won't be because Canada betrayed the United States. It will be because the United States betrayed its own stability.